bunk space for them to eat. However much bunk space you have determines how many how many cattle you can fit into a pen. So, there's a couple of rules of thumb there. About 18 inches per calf in a pen. So however much bunk space you have, whatever that equates to, or around here, 2 to 3 acres per calf pair.
So what happens to most of the livestock when it leaves the farm?
Okay. So a lot of your folks in Western Kentucky are not solely cattle farmers. A lot of them are hobby farmers that have 5 to 15 head of cows, and they're gonna let their cows have babies and let those mama cows raise those babies for probably about 7 months. At this point, that calf's gonna weigh anywhere from probably 450 to 700 pounds, and then they're gonna load it up and take it to their nearest stockyard, unless they know somebody like me who'll come to the farm and buy them right off the farm. But a lot of times they want to go into the stockyard. In some ways, it's a little bit less stressful for them because they don't have to worry about whether they're getting enough for their calf or not, because there's price discovery in the stockyard. There's people bidding, and so they feel like they probably got a fair price, and they didn't have to worry about did I or did I not if somebody's coming there and trying to buy them off the farm. But so they go into the stockyard. Companies like the one I work for buy those cattle, and then we take them to what we call a grow yard, and they'll spend anywhere, depending on the size when we get them, we're going to take them to about 800 pounds. And then most of them are going to ship out west to a feedlot from 800 pounds all the way to about 1,600 pounds for steers and about 1,500 pounds for heifers. And then they're going to go to a plant, and then the next thing you know, they're going to be on your plate at Longhorn Market or somewhere like
that. How do you determine what livestock to raise each year?
Usually farmers are in the cow-calf, on the cow-calf side of things, are thinking about what we just said about what kind of calf can they raise that's going to bring the most money when it's 7 months old. Which one's going to grow the best, because you get paid by the pounds. So which breed animal is going to grow the best and bring the most money when I take it to market? And really, for more reasons than this, but for in large part this one reason, the Angus Association, which is black cattle, black-hided cattle, have done such a great job over the last couple of decades of marketing their product that the black-hided cattle, and you've probably seen it at the store, your mom has, I'm sure, you see a package of beef and it says pure Angus, or it says Angus beef, certified Angus beef, sorry, CAB, certified Angus beef. And so they've done such a great job marketing that those black calves bring more money at the market than, say, a red calf with a white face, which is known as a Hereford, or a white calf with a pink nose, which is Charolais. They bring more money if they're black-hided. And so a lot of people these days are making the decision to raise the black-hided calves, which means you're buying an Angus bull and trying to have black cattle.
So on your farm, what types of technology do you use, and how does it help you with your production?
Yeah. On my particular personal farm, there's not a high level of technology that we're using outside of just what you might expect, doing record keeping on Excel documents and Google Sheets and things like this. Now, on the brokerage side, where I'm employed, we have a lot of technology. For instance, when I first started almost a decade ago, a lot of the records that were being sent in to our main hub from a lot of different locations where cattle were being fed were all written on paper. And so there was a high amount of data input taking place from paper. So there's lots of room for errors to be made, and you lose some accuracy there. And so one thing that I've done since I've been there is we implemented a cloud-based system, feeding system, where as the feed man's in the truck and he's going around and what starts with him loading the wagon to feed the animals, because there's lots of ingredients that go into feeding a certain ration, just like baking a cake. You got all those different ingredients: oil, sugar, butter, milk, etc. I don't know how to bake a cake, but anyway, when you start to do this with your feed ration, you may have corn, you may have distiller's grains, you may have soybean meal, you may have a mineral pack. So 5 to 6 ingredients that go into this. So with this new electronic cloud-based system, web-based system, we can see in real time what the feed man is loading, the ingredients, and we can see if they're properly loading what they should be. And then when they take off to go pin to pin to drop the feed, as they're putting the feed in the bunk, it's reading it out, and immediately we can see if this pen that was supposed to get 1,000 pounds of feed is getting 1,000 pounds of feed, or are they underfeeding or overfeeding. So it's all become, a web-based or cloud-based procedure where the paperwork is gone, thank God. And it also, we also utilize the same program to track medicine and usage and things like that. And these cattle that we're buying out of the stockyard that we talked about, they're high risk cattle because their immune system's not great. When you commingle with other people's cattle, there's going to be some sickness and there's going to be some things like that. So, treating these calves and using antibiotics judiciously, not overusing them, is very, very important. And so all this has to be kept up with. And so we do use, a lot of technology in that regard.
So what type of transportation do you use on your farm? And do you transport all the livestock and equipment yourself?
So yes and no. On my own personal farm, typically we've got trailers that are anywhere from 16 feet to 32 feet long. We haul cattle around in from our farm to another farm, or from our farm to the stockyard. Now, from the feedlot side of things, we're typically using semis. And on a semi, it depends on the size of the animal that you're loading, but you're trying to usually put about 48 to 53,000 pounds on that truck. So if you're loading 750 pound calves, you're going to put about 67, 68 calves on a truck. And the trucks are double deck. You put them up top, you put them down below. But usually your sweet spot is that 50,000 pound mark. And we have a lot and lots of truckers that we use to haul these cattle. I mean, you're talking about feedlots out west that have up to 100,000 head in them, or not up to, but have in excess of 100,000 head. So you think about getting those out there at 67 head at a time, takes a lot of trucks. So there's a lot of logistical issues with that because there's not that many people hauling cattle. So sometimes that can be an issue, especially like in times like right now, there's lots of cattle because the prices are so high coming to the market because everybody's trying to capitalize on these high prices. And so we were just actually talking this week about how trucking could get very tight here in the next few weeks and could be tough on us. Whereas we normally can get rid of cattle pretty quick, get them where they're supposed to go. In the coming weeks, we may end up getting stuck with some that we would like to ship, but may have to wait just because there's a shortage of the trucks.
Do you know if like with the feeding of them, they practice crop rotation, like you change out during seasons which crops are used to feed them?
Well, what we do is we try to feed whatever we can get the cheapest. So if we can get corn cheap, we'll buy corn. If we have to buy hominy, which is like the white corn that you would popcorn, and it looks whiter, that's where hominy comes from. But we use hominy, we might use corn, might use distiller's grain out of these distilleries. They have a byproduct that they don't want. They want it gone off their property when they're making the bourbon or the whiskey, and so it still has protein and some fats in it that's good for feeding cattle, so we use that. We actually would take byproducts from candy companies, cake batter, things that have expired maybe that they can't sell anymore, that we can combine and use that sugar and those fats in our ration to get these cattle fed. So, we're going to change up what we're feeding often. In regard to rotational farming and changing up what you grow on one farm or another, yeah, we do. Sometimes you grow soybeans here, next year you grow corn. Then next year you switch back, So there is that going on too.
Okay. Why did you locate your farm where you located it?
Because my great-grandfather located it there about 100 years ago. And so we just, we're still there,
What economic obstacles does the American farmer face?
The cost of inputs. I mean, 5 or 6 years ago, you've got corn prices in the $3 or $4 a bushel range. In the last 18 months, we've seen corn in excess of $7 a bushel, And so when you're having to spend more to feed these animals, and then also interest is up, and not necessarily the stock market's down, as they would say, but interest has been up. So, this money that farmers have borrowed to buy tractors and to buy the cattle and to buy the property or whatever it may be, everything's more expensive. It's just like every other business, everything's more expensive, and so they're trying to figure out ways to keep costs down and still be able to do what they want to do. But that's also why a lot of people are hobby farmers. They're not in it full time. They have a job, outside of that they rely on for consistent money.
What environmental obstacles does the American farmer face, would you say?
There's all kinds of things that are environmental obstacles. One is if you overpopulate an area, then the next thing you know, instead of being green, it's going to be like this table. It's going to be brown because there's no grass. And when you don't have any grass, then you've got runoff and erosion, and then you've got all kinds of things that are factored in there. And so, there's things that can be done. Just you're talking about rotational grazing, or rotating the crops. You also can do the same thing with cattle. Instead of having one field the size of this table, you fence it off into 8 paddocks, and you let the cattle be here for a time, and you move them here for a time, and here for a time, and by the time they get back to paddock 1, 45 to 60 days have passed, and now this has grown back up and ready to be grazed again. So you don't have that constant pressure on the ground, and that creates those situations where I was just talking about where you've got erosion taking place and it's overgrazed and that kind of thing. So there are things like that can be done. Also, you don't want to get a situation where you're polluting the creeks if your property has a creek. So a lot of times the farm service agencies in these different counties, extension offices, and you and I talked briefly about that before we started this interview, they will oftentimes have programs where a farmer can go in and sign up, and if you're willing to fence the creek off to keep the cattle out of it, to keep them from polluting the water, then they're happy to maybe assist you in the financing of that, maybe up to 50%, sometimes 75% of the cost of it to fence it off to keep the cattle out.
How do you deal with environmental issues that your farm faces?
We just try, like I just said, we try to rotational graze the cattle. We do have our creeks fenced off. Also, you try to, if possible, to use water tanks and waterers to keep them out of the ponds, which can cause erosion, things like pollute the water, etc. So we do all those things, and then on the feedlot side of things, it's just a matter of trying to not overcrowd these pens and to do things like, for instance, if you got a pen right here and here's a creek, you may fence off an area for the pen and leave, say, 15 feet of grass right here. So even if you do overpopulate your pen, it becomes dirt. That runoff does pass through 10 to 20 feet of grass, so that's a filter. So it filters before it gets to the, things like that. There's lots of little things that you can do to make sure that you're trying to, be a good steward of the land.
Have you ever changed the landscape or layout of your farm for farming practices? If you have, how and why?
Not really. Personally, no. We've just we have not done that. The land is how it's been. We just put the fences where they need to be, and it kind of is what it is. If you buy a new farm, then you have to sometimes go in there, clear it somewhat to build a road through it or whatever, but I have not done a whole lot of that personally, no.
How do government policies influence your farm?
How do government policies influence the farm? Well, every year there's ideas brought forth in Congress that could change the way things are done. There's also things that are brought into Congress, just like you were talking about trucking earlier, where they, possibly might try to limit or put restrictions on these truck drivers that are hauling livestock. So, there's always things being proposed in Congress. Sometimes they pass, sometimes they don't, but it's just like anything else. If they pass, and we try to deal with them best we can, and those that we don't need to pass. And just like any other organization, we try to call up our leadership, our state cattlemen associations and our national Cattlemen's Beef Association, try to get those guys to understand we don't need this to go through, and they do their lobbying, and hopefully it goes our way. But if it doesn't, then we have to adjust. But a great example of that is that there's a lot of restrictions on people driving these 18-wheelers down the road in regard to how long can they drive at one time. Well, in the cattle business, it's a little different, because when you load those cattle here in Kentucky and they need to be 18 hours away in Nebraska, and that's if somebody drives straight through, then they need to get there. And it's really hard on the cattle if that person were to have to stop after he's driven for 10 hours or 12 and sleep. So a while back there were some policies trying to be implemented to put restrictions even on these guys hauling livestock. Well, that's just not real feasible. And so that's one of those things that's got, they stopped it in its tracks, because it just doesn't make sense. And so, it makes sense in one way because you don't want tired drivers, but these guys have been doing it their whole life and they're used to driving 18 hours at a time. And it's just way better for the cattle. But we adjust, monitor and adjust if you have to.
Do you use the services offered by a local county extension? Why or why not?
Yeah, some people do. I have on occasion, like fencing that creek off. And then in our company, sometimes they offer things that to help assist you in certain times, maybe of a drought and things like that. And so, if the opportunity arises, you definitely have that there to utilize. There are some people who steer away from that just because they fear that of there being maybe too much exposure to the government. Once you start interacting and taking money from them, then they have a say in what you're doing more than if you never did. And so I know some farmers, especially some of the older guys, that steer clear of that completely for those reasons. But yeah, we've used our farm service agencies before as the company I work for.
How has farming changed during your lifetime?
I think just bigger tractors and more expensive stuff, and a lot more confinement barns where cattle used to always be outside, and now we're growing cattle under roof and things like that. That's all changed, and just everything's more expensive. Cattle are bigger than they used to. Used to, cattle would be fat and finished for processing at 1,200 pounds, 1,100 pounds, because their frame was shorter, so they get fat quicker. But now cattle are bred to be taller and put 1,500 to 1,600 pounds on before they're finished. So that's kind of changed too, but those are probably the main things just off the top of my head.
Have you changed anything about the techniques you use to farm since you've started? If you have, why?
Yeah, the rotational grazing, that's something that 30 years ago people weren't doing hardly at all. And it's just, you live and learn, people do more studies, or the universities do more studies and do research, and then everybody started, telling your neighbor, hey, this worked for me, this works a lot better if you do it this way. So next thing you know, people are cross-fencing their property and rotating their cattle, just like we were talking about earlier, to try to reduce the environmental impact on the land. Plus, it's better for you because you get far more bang for your buck or for your property. You can graze more cattle on less land if you have it fenced off like that.
Do you think the way that farms work now is sustainable for the future? If so, why?
As long as Americans keep eating cheeseburgers, I guess it is. We're it seems like keep adapting and keep making it work somehow. I think that in the grand scheme of things, it's changed. From more and more farmers to less and less farmers, but they're bigger. They're bigger now, and the hog industry's already went that route. And it seems like the beef industry is lining up that same way, where those that are going to be in are going to be big. Instead of having lots and lots of small contributors to the industry. But I think it's sustainable. I hope it is.
How do you think farming will change for future generations, and in positive and negative ways?
I'm sure that there are just going to be more and more advances in the seeds that we're using for corn. You know, we're creating more corn per acre now, bushels of corn per acre now than we ever have. I'm sure that's just going to keep going up. You know, I'm sure the research is going to keep improving the soybean production, all these crop production levels. I'm sure will just continue to go up. We continue to make strides in medications and antibiotics that we're using for these cattle to help keep them healthy, and we're continuing to learn more and more about the nutrition that's required. I think that's just going to keep improving, and we're learning more too about steps that can be taken to do a better job taking care of the environment, the property that you have, you know, and the farms that you have cattle on. So hopefully, those are all going to be better. You know, negative things that could come about. You know, I know there's a lot of talk right now about animal identification. Like right now in the United States, there's really nothing required to identify a calf from the time it's on your property until the time that it's slaughtered or at the processor. And there is talk, and a lot of it, about starting to require an electronic ID tag put into a calf's ear when it's born on your farm that follows it all the way through to production. A lot of people think that's a negative. People that are against it do, because of the cost and how it's probably not very feasible on a lot of these small hobby farms where they don't have the facilities to run these calves in to do the things that they need to be doing if that were required. You know, because you can't just go out and a lot of 75-year-old men can't just walk out in the field and catch a calf and put this tag in its ear, and they don't have the facilities to do it. So who's going to do it? Lots of questions about that. And again, some people don't want the government involved in it to that degree either. But on the other hand, people from Centers for Disease Control would love that, because they could quickly take an animal and figure out where that disease, if there ever were a breakout, where it derived from, originated. You know, so there's people on both sides of it, but you know, I'm sure there'll be a lot of advances, both negative and positive.
So how did you get into farming?
Born into it, and just kind of kept doing it. And then, as you know, I didn't go that route my whole life. I was a teacher for a while and a basketball coach, and then at some point, after I was out of it for 13 to 14 years, then decided to get back into it wholeheartedly, and that's what happened. But I guess my roots.
And why did you decide to become a farmer?
Just seemed like a good opportunity at the time, and sometimes there's some excitement to a degree about starting something new. And so when the opportunity came about, I just grabbed a hold.
And is there anything else we need to know about, like with your farm or anything, do you think?
Just keep eating beef.
I think that's all the questions I have.
All right, thank you.